All right, I want to get started. First of all, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you to the Tobin and Fishman families for sponsoring our series on Tefillah. Specifically, two things. First of all, there is Lule Torah Chashashuai as Avadati Ba'ani. Were it not for Torah as my joy, I would have been lost in my grief. And I saw Yael Ziegler quote this when she sent out an email. I don't know if most of you got it, because we're fundraising for our end of the year campaign. And she was saying how the Torah brings comfort and provides at least some form of comfort. I personally am very grateful for being able to participate in so much Torah learning going on at Matan. And so I encourage you to donate to the end of the year campaign, if you can do so we can continue providing chizuk and inspiration and gain strength from our Torah learning. Specifically, these series on Tefillah in memory of Dodi give many people, including myself, much chizuk as I think about her encouraging us to have a relationship with Hashem at such times and any time, good or bad, and understanding that Tefillah has such a tremendous impact, even if we don't directly see that impact or feel it, or if it's not happening in the way we thought the impact was happening. So I feel that it's very appropriate. Before I introduce Rabbi Alex Israel, Mark's going to come and lead us into Tehillim, which is on the back of your, and you have something else to say, or? Okay. Oh, okay. And here's it.
Tehillim Parak Gimel. Mizlor David v'varcho mipnei Avshalom bano. Adonai ma rabu sarai b'arim kamim alav. Rabim amrim nafshi ein yeshuata lo b'Elohim selah. Yata Adonai magen ba'adi kfodi u'merim roshi. Koli el Adonai ekra v'aneni mahar kadsho selah. Umi shakafti v'ishana hakitzoti ki Adonai yismacheni. Lo ira mimeravot am asher saviv shatu alai. Kuma Adonai hosheni Elohai ki kita kol oivai lechi shinei reshaim shibarta. Adonai Yeshua lecha b'chatecha selah. Tehillim Kaf. Namatzech midmor leDavid. Ya'ancha Adonai biyom tzara yiskadesh Hashem Elohei Ya'achah. Mishlach eslecha mikodesh u'mitzion yisachah. Yizkor kol menochatecha v'yoncha b'shen hatzela. Yishken lecha tilvavecha v'chol afatcha yimalei. V'ranena b'shuatecha u'b'shem Eloheinu nigdol. Yimalei Adonai kol mashloch. Hayadati ki yotzi Adonai Moshicho ya'aneu mishmei kadsho v'gvurot yisa yamino. Eila berecha ve'elu besusim v'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nastir. Hema karu v'nafalu v'anachnu kamnu nitoded. Adonai Hoshia Hamelech Yanenu B'Yom Karim. Shir Hamalot Mima Makim Praticha Adonai. Adonai Shema B'Koli Tianu Aznecha Kashubot L'Kol Tachanun. Im Adonai Tishma Ya Adonai Mi Ya Amo. Kimcha Haslicha Leman Tevarei. Kiviti Adonai Kifta Nafshi V'Li Baro Hachalti. Nafshi L'Adonai Mishomim L'Boker Shomim L'Boker. Yachel Yisrael El Adonai Kiyim Adonai HaChesed V'Arbeim Ufedun. V'Hu Yifei Yisrael Mikol Avonotav. Misha Berach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak V'Yakov. Hu Yivarech Et Chayelei Tzva Hagana L'Yisrael V'Anshei Kachot HaBitachon. העומדים על משמר ארצנו והרי אלינו מגבול הלבנון ומבר מצרים ומן הים הגדול על לבוא הערבה, ובכל מקום שהם, ביבשה, באוויר ובים. ייתן אדוני את אבינו הקמים עלינו נגפים לפניהם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו, מכל צרה וצוקה, מכל נגע ומחלה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם, ויתרם לחטא ישועה ועטר ניצחון. וקיים בהם הכתוב, כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם, להילחם לכם עם אויביכם, להושיע אתכם. ונאמר אמן.
ויחזיר את הנעדרים והחטופים.
יחזיר את הנעדרים והחטופים משפחותיהם בקרוב, וישלח רפואה שלמה לכל הפצועים, ונאמר אמן. First of all, thank you everybody for coming. This is our, I think this is our, by circumstance, this is our first shir this year after.
We had Abby.
Our first live shir after the Chagim this year. And people have asked me in the last couple of weeks, pretty often they say to me, what would Dodi say now? And I can honestly tell you, I don't know what Dodi would say. But I knew that she was pretty normal and just like all of us. So most likely she would have been feeling the same way each of us are feeling and expressing what each of us are expressing, being worried about her children, being worried about her family, being worried about Medinat Israel, and being worried about the Jewish people. I do know that there are probably, if she was going to say something, I'm certain that she would probably say, with all due respect for people in Chutz La'aretz, what are you doing there now? And I think she would say to people in Chutz La'aretz, come when you can plan to come. Don't wait before you have no ability to plan. I know that she would say that. I also know that she would tell me at least, and she would tell others, that what we can do is we can daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that we have to go through life with humility and understand that we don't have as much control as we think we have. That was one of the things that she would say to me all the time. We know nothing. And I saw something today. Rabbi Avram Chaim Shur, who has a commentary on the Igeret HaRambam, he says the following: the humble person achieves contentment through his belief that God controls all of life's events. One who believes that his affairs are controlled by chance feels cheated, and despair follows quickly. If one understands that God is close to his daily life, however, he trusts in his Creator's fairness, even when events seem beyond his mortal comprehension. Thus, one is content in the knowledge that God will deal with him justly. When we started this series of tefillot, I never thought we would need them as much as we need them today and in this time. And I hope everybody, when listening to Rabbi Israel's words, that we get a lot of contentment and know that our job now, more than anything else that we can do, is to be humble and to do as much tefillah as we can and find comfort in our relationship, our individual relationships with HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Thank you. Erev Tov, Erev Tov L'Kulam. I want to thank the family, all the families here who I feel so close to. The Fishmans, first of all, and of course to you, Mark, and to the Wiesel, Brody's, Fishmans who aren't here. Remembering Dodi with such fondness. I worked on the Eshkolot program at Matan. And what I can say is Dodi was two things for that program. I think she was a lot more. But number one, she was the safest pair of hands you could ever imagine. When Dodi was around, you knew everything would run on time and run smoothly. And the other thing is she was the life of the party. She was the energy, the dynamo behind the program. There were other people running it, but it sort of seemed like, when she was there, both she pushed it forward and held it in place. And it was wonderful to work alongside her, to work under her in that program. And she is missed by so many here in the community at Matan, and of course in the context of the family, and I'm sure with all of the ripple effect that she made on the Jewish world. So let these words be Ilui Nishmata, and what we're going to learn tonight. So we're going to talk a little bit about Tefillah, as we said, and learn a perek, Hashem Malach Geut Lavesh, which we say very frequently, the Shir Shel Yom for Friday. We say it on Friday nights when we, be on the Kabbalah Shabbat after Dr Dodi, and we also said in our Psukkah Zimran Shabbat. So we said at least, 3 times we get it in, and so we should really know what we're saying. Right? So, sometimes people think you don't really need to know what you're saying, right? There's a lovely story that I remember reading in an article called "Education for Prayer" by Rabbi Steinsaltz, where Steinsaltz tells a story about a yeshiva somewhere in Yerushalayim, where they're davening on Rosh Hashanah, and the yeshiva bachrim are really, davening, and somebody comes in, and a very, very simple Jew who looked like he really wasn't one of the educated, and they are saying Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Imloch al Ma'ed, and they're talking Elu be'elu be'petzach mepatzachim, and you're talking about the angels, and you read those lines and you thank God there's a tune, because what exactly are the words meaning? And this guy is davening with such kavana. He's davening with such kavana. And at the end of Tefillah, the yeshiva bachrim go to the man and they said to him, "What do you know that we don't know?" In other words, how do you have so much kavana for that Tefillah? And he says, "I don't understand a word of it." So they said, "Well, what were you thinking?" He says, "I only have one kavana for all of my davening, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give me a parnasa." He says, whatever I'm saying, that's my kavana, right? And that's all I need to think about. So the truth is, maybe, Rachamana Libabai, right? The HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs your heart. Sometimes, maybe at the moment, we're actually thinking about our children in the army or whatever it is, and whatever we're saying, we find a way to swerve the davening. I found I'm taking loads of psukim in my davening completely out of context at the moment, and maybe we don't need to know what davening is, but we'll try in this case to actually to look at what the perek means. Okay, so let's try and take a look. We all know the words, but we'll read and translate and explain some of the problems or some of the peculiarities of the language, and then hopefully what we're going to do is we're going to offer 2 different alternative readings of this perek, which I hope will be in some way complementary. Let's see how we go. Okay, Hashem Malach, God ruled. Geut Lavesh. Okay, God was Lavesh, he clothed himself with Geut, like Ga'ava, right? For us, Ga'ava is a bad thing. We're not meant to be too proud because we're human beings. But Hashem is Hashem, so he's a king, right? Hashem Malach, Melech, king. So he's allowed to wear majesty. He robes himself in majestic attire, right? He puts on Hashem Malach, Geut Lavesh. He puts on pride. Lavesh Hashem. Oz Hitazar. Now, by the way, this is the poetry. It's got a beat. Hashem Malach, Geut Lavesh, Lavesh Hashem, Oz Hitazar, Af Tikvon Tevel, Bal Timot. So there's a certain rhythm here. Okay, and so therefore the Geut Lavesh Hashem, Oz Hitazar is sort of carrying it through. But let me just say this, that we start off with this image of Hashem as a king. Hashem Malach, Geut Lavesh, he's dressing up in his royal clothes. Sometimes we describe God in human terms. And you'll notice the end of the perek, frequently this happens in Tehillim, the end of the perek picks this up as well. So we have finished with Hashem la'orech yamim, right? What do you say? Long live the king, right? So the same thing. Hashem la'orech yamim, even you have the sense of, in the middle of it is Nachon ki sacha me'az, your throne is steady, me'olam ata, you're there from the beginning of time. So God is the king, he's there from the beginning of time, he's then till the end of time. Hashem li'orech yamim. So this is what the academics call a coronation psalm or whatever it might be. That here we are describing Hashem as the Melech. But the question is, as Melech, what is he going to do? Okay. So again, I'm just going to try and read and translate, and then we'll get into really understanding. Hashem Malach, God ruled. Geut Lavesh, he clothed himself in majesty. Lavesh Hashem, he enrobed himself, and Oz Hitazar. he clothed himself, he put on an azar, a belt of strength. Okay? Hitazar from the word azar, right? Is a belt with oz, with might. Okay? Aftikon tevel, to establish the world, baltimos, lest it should fall apart, lest it should topple. Why is the world going to topple? What's going on? And nachon kisachal me'az, and your throne is steady, or nachon, it is correct, it is me'olam ata, from the beginning of time. What's going on here? What's the story we're telling? Right? If you look at the first source I put it from Nachum Sarna, Nachum Sarna points out here that the minute we put God into royal clothes, we put it on his belt. People used to put on a belt for war, right? Nowadays people wear an ephod, right? But people used to wear like long robes. And if they wanted to run, right, the women here know probably better than I do, right? They would have to sort of hitch up their skirts. They could make a short skirt, they could run. So when you went to war, you put on a belt. It did three things. Number one, it meant that the people who are wearing long robes could actually run. Number two, you could tuck your axe or your sword into the belt, right? It would hold whatever you needed to take with you to war. And the third thing is probably like, you see, I don't know, you see like these weightlifters put on these belts, right? Because apparently it firms up the body and it means you can carry more stuff. Okay, so all of those things. So we started Hashem. Hashem begins by wearing royal clothes, and then when he finishes wearing his royal clothes, apparently he puts on a war belt. Oz hitazar, puts on a war belt. Aftikon tevel bal timot, because he's got to make sure that the world doesn't fall apart. There's a story here, and it says, Nachon kisachal me'az, your throne has been steady me'az, from then, me'olam ata, from the beginning of time. So what's happening there? We'll answer the question. Nasu narot Hashem, the rivers raised up. Nasu naharot kolam, they raised up their voices. Yisun harot yachyan, the rivers raised up their Dochiam. We don't really know what that word means because it's the only place in Tanakh where it is. So let's assume it's sort of like kolam, right? You all know that water is very noisy, okay? If you're if you're standing by a waterfall, it's noisy, right? You hear a lot of the rush of water, right? You're by the sea, the roar of the sea. So the rivers raised up God. They raised up their voices. They raised up their roar. Mikolot ma'im rabim adirim mishpreyam adir b'marom Hashem. And here, there's a problem with how to translate it. And we're going to give two readings, which are going to give each translation. But for now, I'll say, Mikolot might mean from the sounds of those great waters, Adirim, Mishpreyam, what do you hear? Adir Bamarom Hashem. Okay? So you look at these great waters, right? You go to Niagara Falls or whatever it is, and you see the water, and you see how amazing it is. And what do you say? Marabu Masech Hashem, right? You say, Adir Bamarom Hashem. Right? Always also like the idea that you've got the sense of the water, which is very deep, right? And then you've got the sense of marom. You've got the depth and you've got the high. And also the water, when you're looking at rivers or sometimes you're on a plane or even if you're standing looking at the sea, if it's a gray sky, the sea will look gray. If it's a blue sky, the sea will look blue, right? So there's that sense of the Adir Bamarom, that the rivers reflect the Marom. Okay, so out of the waters, these great waters, Adirim Mishpreyam, these crashing, amazing, wild sea, what do you hear? Adir Bamarom Hashem. Or Mikolot might mean greater than the sounds of the water, Adirim Mishpreyam, Adir Bamarom Hashem. The question is the water like speaking God's praises, was God even greater? And I'll explain why those two readings are relevant in a minute. And at the end, Eidotecha ne'emnu ma'od. Your laws are very true. Leveitcha na'ava kodesh, to your house your house is suitable for sanctity. Hashem la'orechem. Okay, so we end off with law and the Beit HaMikdash. How does all this fit together, right? Hashem's the king. He goes to war. He stops the world falling apart. Then we've got to hold it with rivers and seas and then something we make our way back somehow to law and Mikdash. What's story? There seems to be a story here, but what exactly is it? So I want to try and sort of figure this out. And as I say, we're going to give two readings. And the first is going to come from the Yalkut Shimoni. We're going to see Yalkut Shimoni as a sort of a collection. Anytime you hear a midrash, which is called Yalkut or Leked, it's sort of a midrash. Midrashim come usually from Eretz Israel, the 1st to the 4th to the 5th century, but a lot of times they were passed on Baal Peh, and then they were collated. Yalkut Shimoni is actually a sort of late collation of midrash. Let's read the midrash here. Rabbi Amma bar Kahana b'shem Rabbi Levi said, "Mitchilat bri'ato shel olam lo haya el ole kiluso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu ela min hamayim." At the beginning of creation, the praise of God only came from the water. We all know that at the beginning of creation, what was there? Right? Right? At the beginning of the world, the whole world is submerged in water. Right? And so from the beginning of the world, what praise was there? It was the water which gave praise to God. And what did it say? Mikolot mayim rabim. Out of those amazing waters, those numerous waters, we hear Adir b'maromash. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, gosh, the water praises me so well. Okay? And I can't wait till I create human beings. Just think, it's going to be such beautiful praises, right? If now the water praises me so nicely, when I create human beings, it's going to be a choir, it's going to be a harmony, it's going to be a chorus, it's going to be beautiful. What happened? Amad dor enosh umaradbo. Human beings came along, and we all know human beings don't do so well. You know, we go through Gan Eden, Chet Gan Eden, Cain and Hevel. Dor Enosh, according to Chazal, is the beginning of Avodah Zarah. Dor Hamabel Umaradbo. Suddenly human beings they don't really sing God's praises. In fact, they mess up the world. So what does God do? God says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Yifnu Elu v'yamdu v'yavo otam. You know what? Let's get rid of those human beings and let's bring back the water. Right? Of course. What's that talking about? Hadahu dichti v'yigashem ala haaretz. Okay? In other words, who is the most loyal servant to God? The water. God thought that human beings, he had some anticipation that human beings would be able to achieve that degree of loyalty and service to Hashem. However, human beings have this sort of independent streak where they want to do whatever they want. They don't want to listen to God. Okay? And therefore, water becomes the answer to everything. And Mikolot Mayim Rabim, we hear Adir B'maromash. By the way, then they give a mashal, it's an interesting mashal. So I'll just read it with you. Imagine a king who had a palace, and they would every morning get up and they'd see the king walking through the corridors, and they'd bow, or they'd make some gesture, or they'd do something which would some sort of sign language and say good morning. And the king says, these people who can't even speak, they all treat me with such respect. If they could speak even more. So he put in speaking people, right? Here, Pikeach usually means intelligent, but in their world, before we had the ability to really educate people who couldn't speak, it was the same thing. Anyway, the speaking people come in. What did they do? They took over the palace, right? We don't want him to be in charge. We'll be in charge, right? So according to this is going to be the first reading that we have of the parak, okay? And the reading basically is going back me'olam ata, from the beginning of time, okay? And if we follow the Yalkut Shimoni, so now Hashem Alach, God originally ruled. He created Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz. Geut lavesh, he was the majesty lavesh Hashem. And the world was all there covered in water. He starts creating the world. Suddenly he creates human beings. And suddenly he realizes things are going spiraling out of order. Ozi Tazar, he has to put on his war belt, right? And after Konteva Baltimore, he has to steady the world, not physically, but in terms of the climate of the world from a moral perspective, because human beings were not behaving as they want. But since then, since you put the world into order, now that's a bit of a question, right? But since you put the world into order with a flood, right? Since then you've taken control. And now we tell the story in depth, right? But it's really the story about the flood. The rivers raised up their great roar. And now, of course, I'm not sure how that fits in, but we'll try and deal with that in a few minutes. Okay, that's story number one. The water is loyal to God, people are problematic. Okay. Now, by the way, this is a theme which you find in other places in Tanakh as well. And I put here a table at the bottom here in source number 3, where you might already have noticed or paid attention to the fact that this parak, Hashem Malach, has an interesting affinity with Shirat Hayam. And if you think about it, if we've given this explanation, right, Shirat Hayam is also an example of where we have people who are frustrating, obstructing Hashem's ratzon. They are subjugating Bnei Israel, and they certainly want to obstruct Bnei Israel from leaving. And how does Hashem put down his enemy, so to speak? By means of submerging them in water, right? So this is what we have. Like instead of Hashem Malach, Hashem L'Orech Yamin, we have Hashem Yimlok L'Ambed in the Shira. Geut Lavesh, Asher Al Hashem Ki Ga'o Ga'a. Or Ozi Tazar, or Ziv Zimratia, Nehelta Ba'ozcha. Or Nachon Kisachar, or Afti Konteva, Machon L'Shitral Pa'alta Hashem, Migdash Hashem Konenu Yadecha. Here we have Mikolot Ma'im Rabim Adirim, and Taluka Oferet B'Mayim Adirim. Mishbreyam, Ramabayam, Na Bakodesh, Neve Kochecha. And of course, Adir Bamarom Hashem will parallel with Ne'edari Bakoach, Micha Mocha, Ne'edar Bakodesh. Okay, so essentially what we're saying is there is a whole Megama, there's a whole way of looking at things whereby we're telling a story about the loyalty of water and the randomness of human beings, the rebelliousness of human beings. And that's how we're going to see things, and that's the story we start telling. But there is another way to see it, and this way is seen by many when you actually look at a different theme in Tehillim, and maybe let me try and express this by giving some way of introduction. In ancient Babylonian stories, they had this sense that the sea had always wanted to invade the land. And that the gods in creating the world had to somehow push back the sea, right? If you look at the Tehillim I put here, what did I put here? Well, let's see. Okay, first, maybe Baruch Nafshi is a good place to start. Baruch Nafshi, which we say on Rosh Chodesh, describes the creation of the world, right? Baruch Nafshi Hashem, Shem HaGadol Ma'od, Hod V'Hadar Lavashta. And we have, by the way, there's interesting Lavashta, right? Like Geut Lavesh, Hod V'Hadar Lavashta, like Geut Lavesh, right? Same thing. And we talk about the creation of the world. We start with with light, or Salma. You wear light like a robe, and you set up the heavens. Interestingly enough, there, if you look at Pasuk Hey, Yasad Eretz Al Mechoneha Bal Timot Olam Ba'ed. Again, they've got the sense that the world's going to fall apart. Bal Timot, it's going to topple, it's going to collapse. And look what he's. I mean, I assume we all remember the basic story of Bereshit, right? Where the creation chapter, you didn't get to Perek Gimel, that's one thing, but Perek Aleph, most people know. So you have the creation of light, and then they separate the waters, and then on the third day, Hashem pushes back the water, but Tira'eha Yabasha, and the land is exposed, okay? So got this sense of pushing back the waters. So look what it says. Tahom, the deep, the water, kilavush kisito, it covered the world like a garment. Al harim, over the mountains, yamdu mayim. So originally the world started with water covering it. Min ga'aratcha yunusun. Hashem, ga'arai, God bellowed at it. God, said, "Ugh," and he pushed it back. And min kol ramcha, from your thunder, yechafezun, the water trembled. Ya'alu harim, the water went over the hills. Yerdu b'ka'ot, it went down to the valleys. El makom ze yasad talahem, to the place which you designated for them. Gevul samta bal yavun bal yeshuvun l'chasot haaretz, and you made a border. You made a border that the water should never again cover the world. Now, this is relating back to something very prime, which is that they felt that somehow, again, maybe this comes from a certain part of the world which were more prone to flooding, more prone to tsunamis. Now we've got rising ocean levels, so maybe we're also getting a little nervous in certain places in the world, right? Not only just in, I don't know, Holland, but this idea that the water originally covered the world, and the water has this sort of like demonic, desire to get its territory back, right? And wants to cover the earth. And God had to, first of all, he had to use a gara, he had to yell it back, and then he had to establish the gvul, right, a border. And by the way, we have a lot of examples of this. For example, even another parak which we say is a Shir Shel Yom, Sunday Shir Shel Yom. The David is Hashem Aretz Meluah Tevel B'Yosheba. He sets up the world. Kihu Al Yamim Yisada. He set it up over the water. And then what does it say? Right? Su Sharim Shechem. Mi Zemelach Hagod. Hashem Izuz V'Gibor. Hashem Gibor Milchama. But who's he fighting? Right? Hashem Tzvaot. Hu Melech HaKavod Selah. Who's God fighting? And some of the Mepharshim will say, well, actually, he's fighting that water. That water wants to get back, right? That water wants to. There are so many prakim. One parak which we say usually during slichot, right, is very interesting. We say, "Ata porarta ba'oz chayam." You pummeled the sea. Shibarta rashei tininim alamayim. Atari tzasta rashei leviatan. Tinena machal la'am nesiyim. You had to fight the sea monsters, right? Right? God is seen as having to fight the water with all its monsters. Water is very scary, right? The seas are very scary, right? Especially, you had to navigate the seas in a boat. You lived near the coast. You never knew what was going to happen, right? Even now, I always find it funny when I walk around Tel Aviv and there's like these tsunami signs, right? Exit. I'm like, we've got enough problems like that. We need that, right? But there's this sense that you can never know what the sea's going to do. You can never know, right? I'll just give you one other parak, and then we'll read Rav Soloveitchik, and then we'll try and take this into a more conceptual direction. Take a look at this one. Source number 6, Tehillim Memvav. I just want to show this as like a broad theme. God is a protection and a source of strength. Ezra b'tzarot nimtza ma'od. He helps us when we're in tzara. Al kain, and therefore, now what are we worried about? Lo nira, we won't be afraid. B'hamir aretz, when the world starts collapsing, where's it going to collapse to? Uvamot harim b'leiv yamim, and when the hills collapse into the sea, right? Yemu yechmuru meimav, the waters, they're swirling. Yirashu harim begabatel sela. And we've got this, if you look down to Nahar Plagav Yismachu, Ir Elohim Kodesh Mishkanei Elyon, Elohim Bekirba, God is in the midst, Baltilot, lest it collapse. Yazercha Elohim Lifnot Boker Ki Anochi Elohim, Arum Bagoyim, Arum Ba'aretz, Hashem Tzvakot Imanu, Iskav Lanu, Elohei HaKoseh. I don't know, I think it's enough prakim to prove this theme, that the water, and let's... before I'll do the rest of it in a second, but just look at the last paragraph of Rav Soloveitchik at the bottom of this page, source 7. The side of a tempestuous sea of whirling, raging waves that beat upon the shore there to break, symbolized to the Judaic consciousness the struggle of chaos and void with creation, the quarrel of the deep with the principles of order, and the battle of confusion with the law. So basically, you stand at the top of a cliff and you watch the waves and they're pushing and they come back and they're going to have another turn and another turn and they're bashing and they're bashing and they're bashing. It's almost as if like they really want to invade unless something's going to stop them. Will the cliff stop them on? Now, by the way, according to this, we're going to switch the parak completely. Okay. We said Hashem Malach, God ruled, Geut Lavesh, Osi Tazar, he went into battle, stopped the world from collapsing. What? Into collapsing what? Right? Into the sea. The sea wants to invade Earth, and now we want to protect Earth, right? And now we're going to read it differently. Now we're going to tell the story as Nasu Narot Hashem, Nasu Narot Kolam, Yisun Rocharam. However, Mikolo, even above the war with all its power, with all of its noise, thought that it was able to overpower Earth, but Mikolo, greater than the Kolot Mayim Rabim Adir Mishbreyam, greater than that is Hashem. Hashem's even greater. Okay, so according to the first reading, the water is loyal to Hashem, people are the problem. According to the second reading, right, Hashem's actually confronting the water, right, and Hashem wants there to be a world, but the water wants to take over the world. The water symbolizes the sources of chaos, and Hashem has to fight it. Now you might turn around and say, this is really bizarre. You know, I read Bereshit. God's in control, right? We have these psukim like Hu Amar Vayehi, Hu Tziva V'Ya'amod, right? God just needs to say Yehi or Yehi Rakia B'toch Hamayim, and it happens. But I think we all know, any of us who have learned Rashi on Perek Aleph, that the Midrash keeps on telling us that things didn't quite go according to plan, right? So, for example, you know the story about the Shtei HaMa'orot, the Mor HaGadol, the Mor HaKatan. Originally, the sun and moon were meant to be the same size, but they had a big fight and there was jealousy, right? And therefore, he made one big and one small. I don't understand. If he wanted to make two Ma'orot the same size, he couldn't have done it. It's like nature rebelled against God. Nature's got its own power. Or another midrash, which we say, that they say that God said that it should be eitz pri or sepri. That trees should have had fruit, but the bark should have tasted the same as, you know what I'm talking about, the Rashi? And then it says, no, that eitz or sepri. So Rav Kook calls it chet haaretz, right? The world rebelled against God. According to this, what we're saying is that there is almost like, even in, not only in human beings, but even in the inanimate world, there's almost a rebellious streak. There's a sense of resistance to the rules that God sets before him. And you know, let's take a look at source number 7 from Rav Soloveitchik's Halachic Man. It's here at the bottom of the page, and this is a very powerful source, I think. When God engraved and carved out the world, he did not entirely eradicate the chaos and the void, the darkness from the domain of his creation. Rather, he separated the complete, perfect existence from the forces of negation, confusion, and turmoil, and set up cosmic boundaries. Sorry, this shouldn't be a paragraph break. Eternal laws to keep them apart. In other words, Hashem created void, chaos, negation, confusion, and he also created perfect creation. And then he created boundaries, right? The boundaries, for example, is the shoreline, right? The shoreline is a boundary, but we'll in a minute talk about other boundaries. He says, therefore, the chaos, the void, now Judaism affirms the principle of creation out of absolute nothingness. Therefore, the chaos and the void, the deep, the darkness, and relative nothingness must have all been fashioned by the Almighty before the creation of the orderly, majestic, beautiful world. However, the forces of relative nothingness at times exceed their bounds. They wish to burst forth out of the chains of obedience that the Almighty imposed upon them and seek to plunge the earth back to chaos and void. It is only the law that holds them back and bars the path before them. And I was thinking about this when I was preparing this shir, and I was thinking about all different types of boundaries, right? We have physical boundaries, right? We have our cells are meant to grow at a regular rate, and then chas v'shalom, a cancer comes along, decides to break the rules of how cells are meant to multiply, right? And they go berserk, right? And they cause illness and death. And that's the idea that chaos is suddenly, there was meant to be a boundary, but the water burst forth. The water wasn't willing to obey the boundary. Creation didn't obey the laws, right? We're dealing with this war, which how did it start? Some people burst through a boundary. They didn't accept the boundary, right? Boundaries are there. By the way, this is what Rabbi Alex is pointing out is Eidotecha ne'emnu mi'od. If you talk about the social fabric of society, if people just, we all know this situation, right? You're waiting in a store and you're waiting in line, right? I'm from England, right? England specializes in standing in a queue. But then you come to live in Israel and suddenly you realize everybody's jumping the queue. So you jump the queue, right? Once you start breaking the laws, then there's no system anymore, right? That's the notion of it happens in human nature, it happens in the physical world, right? What Soloveitchik is pointing about, what I think what we might be saying with this parak is, right? Hashem Alach, God creates a system, Geut Lavesh, but at a certain point, he has to fight it because the system starts going berserk, right? The system isn't obeying the laws. The water wants to come back and invade, and he has to establish, Afti Kontevel, we want our borders back. We want our boundaries back. We want the order of nature. We want the things to stay where they're meant to be. And we say that Hashem is, by the way, I always think about this on a Friday, right? Friday, maybe our week's gone a little bit, spiraled out of control, right? And we stand there on Friday night, let all go back into order, right? As we're saying, Hashem Malach, right? You want this, but we want Hashem l'orech yamim. We want Hashem to reestablish those boundaries. We want Hashem to push the waters back. In this regard, I just wanted to learn with you an amazing midrash, because I wanted to. There's this phenomenal midrash in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. It's also a Gemara Sukkah. In the Babli, it's in Masechet Sukkah. In the Yerushalmi, it's in Sanhedrin. And I want to try and talk about how sometimes we even we also want to overstep those boundaries. And let me explain why. What do I mean? Let's read the story. Okay, it says here, David wanted to dig the foundations of the Beit HaMikdash. And he decides he's going to dig down to the bedrock. Okay? It says, Chafar 15 meot amin v'lo ashkach tahoma. Apparently he wanted, now the interesting question that all the Mepharshim ask is, why does he want to get down to the bedrock? According to some, it's because he wants to make sure there's no tumah underneath the Beit HaMikdash. But here, it actually says that he wants to get to the Tehom, right? We've got this sense of that the Eben Hashtiyah, that there is a stone which the Beit HaMikdash is built on, which is like the nuclear reactor of the whole world. It's like where the world is created from, right? It's the Tabor Haaretz, the umbilicus of the world, right? There's that concept of the Eben Hashtiyah. This is where the world was created, that Yerushalayim is indeed the center of the world. And it seems like David wants to sort of probe to get to that primal, to dig in, to tap in to that primal energy. Of course, why is the Beit HaMikdash there? By the way, I'll go back to Lashem Haaretz Umloat Kihu Al Yamim Misada Va'al Narot Yechaloneha Mi Yaleh B'Har Hashem. Maybe there's a connection between the water and the Har Hashem, right? So anyway, he digs down and he couldn't find the Tehom. He couldn't reach the deep. Choshech al Panei Tehom. Ishka Chada Atzitz. Well, what did he find? He found a piece of earthenware, a piece of pottery. Ubal Marimite. He wanted to raise it. Amalei. The pottery spoke to him. They can do that in Midrashim. The pottery spoke to him and says, Let atyachol. You can't do it. Amalei lama. He said, why? Amalei. Denahacha kavish al tahoma. Because I am basically plugging the tahom. Right? I'm plugging the primeval waters. If you move me, this piece of earthenware, then it's going to burst forth and go nuts. Okay? Wild story. He says to him, Amalei umin ematatacha. From when are you here? Amalei Min shata d'shamar achmana kale b'Sinai. I'm here since the day when it's Hashem said at Mount Sinai, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Radat ara b'shakot. The land quaked and went down. But ana yaib hacha kabish al dehoma. And I am here holding back the deed. Avgav came, lo shamalim. But David wouldn't listen. David wouldn't listen. Kivan derime. He raised up the piece of earthenware. Salik tehomo va mitva alma. Suddenly the primeval waters went up and they wanted to completely submerge. They're rising and they're rising and they're rising. And they didn't know what to do. And there's a whole interesting thing with Achitofel, which I'm not going to get involved with, and the Kal V'chomer. But in the end, what does he decide to do? He starts saying Shir HaMa'alot, right? We said 1,500 Amot. Ma'alot can mean to go up, can mean to go down, right? It's vertical, Shir HaMa'alot. And of course, the Shirei HaMa'alot are about the steps, the 15 steps. He said 15 Shirei HaMa'alot. For every one of the Shirei HaMa'alot, the water went down 100, 100, 100, 100, 100. Through the Shirei HaMa'alot, David managed to tame the waters. Phew, the world is saved, and we can all, move on. What is this idea of David being so interested to get to the Tehom? And what is the earthenware? In an amazing article by Rav Brandis, Rav Yehuda Brandis, his interpretation to this was this: that David doesn't just want to reach a bedrock to get rid of Tumah. He literally wants to plug into the essence of creation. Because, of course, what is the Beis Hamikdash? Right? The Beis Hamikdash is just the place of truth. We want to connect to Hashem, but we want to be so true. And he's willing, and by the way, he's so frustrated by this piece of earthenware, because you know what this piece of earthenware means. Earthenware is always a sign of civilization. That's why archaeologists love it so much, right? And that means I'm not the first one to be here, right? That means what my Beis Hamikdash is going to sit on top of somebody else's Beis Hamikdash. We're going to base our culture, we're going to base our laws on something that other people do. I've got to get rid of this. Sometimes I think it reminds me of being teenage, right? Being a teenage. You want to be original, right? You want to be true, right? And you're gonna unplug that hole, even though you're going to unleash crazy stuff because you are so connected to truth, right? You've got to pick up that earthenware. You can't be like other people. You want truth so badly, you're going to do crazy stuff, right? Even though the wise parent turns around and says, you really should not do that, right? David can't resist it, right? King David is the ultimate teenager, right? Who wants to, for all the best reasons, wants to unplug the hole, and suddenly he unleashes actually something real. And that real is literally the energy which created the world, right? But, we can't deal with truth, unbridled truth. Unbridled truth sometimes sweeps us away. We need human conventions. We need the pottery. We need the earthenware. We need. By the way, that's what a Beit Hamikdash is. Beit Hamikdash has certain rituals. What do they say? Well, I don't really want the Kohen to do it. I want to do it. Right? No, sorry, you're not a Kohen. You're not Mishavat Levi. You can't do it. They're a protocol, right? Some people will turn around and say, no, but I don't like the Nusach HaTefillah. I just want to play my flute, right? That's like the water, right? As opposed to the conventions. Ironically, what he has to learn is that the Beis Hamikdash itself is a convention, right? Has conventions to do with it. Why am I even relating to this? Because I have to explain the last pasuk. Eidotecha ne'emnu mion, right? There is this powerful water, and this powerful water threatens order. It can threaten order of creation, but it also can threaten social conventions. Sometimes, by the way, it is so powerful. It represents a sense of desire, it represents a sense of truth, but it's a truth we can't hold because it's too undisciplined. It will destroy everything in its wake. And we have to learn how to put a piece of earthenware on it. Your laws are very trustworthy. We use laws in order to put people into, somebody can say, no, but I want to play my music loud at 3 a.m. No, but the neighbors have to sleep, right? You're right for wanting to play your music loud at 3 a.m. We all do, don't we? But, we don't want to disturb the neighbors, right? And Leveit Hanav HaKodesh, there's also something about the Kedusha of the Beit HaMikdash that it still, so to speak, wants to be aligned on this, like swirling to home, right? We have to be aligned with truth, but we can't be always completely, right? Unfiltered truth, because it doesn't, we can't hold that. So maybe this explains a little bit about the last pasuk. We need to put religion into a bayit. We need to be able to have conventions of religion. By the way, sometimes they don't work. We come back to our current situation, right? After Simchat Torah, I had a very, very difficult time personally. We're talking about Tefillah. I had a very, very difficult time with Tefillah. I think many people have experienced a great shock, a great loss. Sometimes have exactly this experience, right? I felt we've just gone through Slichot, Yamim Noraim. We've gone through, the whole of Sukkot, and we've been saying Ana Hashem Oshiana. We're doing our Shanot, and then suddenly get to the last day when we're meant to and then this terrible tragedy happened, and I just felt such a sense of Kadosh Baruch Hu giving us a slap in the face. Like as we're saying Geshem and we're asking for rain, and then we get this, and then Ashul said we should say Avinu Malkeinu. I'm like, I said that already, right? I already did that. Like I felt a real sense of Hester Panim, like the conventions, the Beitcha wasn't working, right? I had to find my own route. I had to find my own route to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wasn't always the words that people wanted me to say didn't always work, right? I think that's a question of how Tefillah is meant to speak. But I very much feel like this parak, if I want to maybe try and wrap up and summarize, I'll say how I want to read it maybe in this final reading is this, right? We say Hashem Malach, God rules, God creates a system. Lavesh Hashem. Also Tazar, but at a certain point the system doesn't work. Chas v'shalom, somebody gets sick. Chas v'shalom, a war breaks out. Violence breaks out. People who should have rules of civilization that you don't go and butcher people suddenly think they can. It's crazy. Aftikon Teva Baltimot, the world's going to fall apart. And we're asking Hashem to establish order. Nachon kisachah me'az. This is what we're saying. Is Hashem, in the past, you knew how to establish order in the world. You knew how to push back those raging waters that wanted to destroy the planet, right? And maybe, and maybe you will again. And we tell the story in detail. Nasu Naharot Hashem, Nasu Naharot Kolam. They raised up their voices. They wanted to invade the world. However, Mikolot Ma'im Rabim Adrim B'Shem, beyond those smashing waves, Adir B'Mar Hashem, you're greater than them. Right? You've established laws, right? That's why we live according to your laws, so that we can create a world of order, that we can actually find a route to the things that we need to. It's also a way that we can access Kedusha, right? If we access Hashem without a system, it will fall apart, right? The people who entered the Pardes and didn't know how to be prepared, Nadav and Abihu enter the Kodesh Kodashim and get eaten up by the fire, right? We need a bite. Hashem Norach Yami. We want to live in a world with Kedusha. We want to live in a world with law. We want to live in a world with boundaries. We want to live in a world where those boundaries are able to give us life and preserve life. And I think in this parak, that is what we're asking Hashem to do. I'll just say Hashem Malach. All the Hashem Malach. This is parak Sadi Gimel. But very soon after Sadi Gimel, we get to prakim that we always say with our Kabbalat Shabbat, other prakim, Hashem Alach Tagela Aretz, and these are all the Lifnei Hashem Tivali Shpot Aretz Shpot Tevel B'Tzedek V'Ami B'Manotel. We're asking Hashem to tzedek, the order of justice, of tzedek, of mishpat, to bring His power into the world. This isn't quite in that series of Kabbalat Shabbat, but this is just a couple of prakim before. So this is yet another Hashem Malach. This is a parak which talks about Hashem's power to establish order, to impose order. And indeed, our world will return from the chaos that we find ourselves in. Our children will all return safely from Gaza and from their other places that they are hosted. And please God, we should reestablish our borders, right, both in the south and in the north, and all of the Ptsuim should experience a refuah shlema, and the world should be able to come back to a sense of Hashem Malach, a sense of order, a sense of bounty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.